Everyone. I am Sarah Parrish, and I'm going to talk to you today about writing your artist statements. A lot of times we're assigned to write these, and we don't really know where they go or why they're used. So some places you normally will see an artist statement or that you'll need one are on your personal website for applications for either grant funding, for an exhibition that might put you on, for awards, things like that, or hanging up in a museum or a gallery next to your artwork. By the way, when you make it big time, a lot of times you won't be writing your own artist statement for a gallery context. You'll have someone like me, who is an art historian, writing them about you. And so that's all the more reason you want to include lots of good information for art historians and viewers to draw on in your artist statement. Your length is going to vary based on your audience. A lot of times ones that are on a museum or gallery wall might be a bit shorter so you can read them faster, maybe a long paragraph. Applications will specify the number of words, so that makes things usually easier. And on your personal website, it's up to you. You can use that space to flesh it out a bit longer, but usually 2 paragraphs is where you want to stop the line. So instead of taking apart one of your artist statements, I have an artist in my own life. She's 5 years old, my daughter Lillian, and this is an example of her work. So I wrote a pretend artist statement from her perspective that we can dissect and improve as a model for how you might improve your own artist statements. This is an example of her work. There's some witches here. I'm not sure what's going on in the lower left corner. But I like to think that's me with an iced coffee in the corner. Cheers. Here we have this princess ballerina type figure watering her garden of heart flowers. And my personal favorite, a mermaid swimming underneath a boat. You can see everybody's legs and oars up at the top there. So from Lily's perspective, I wrote a sample artist statement. Again, yours is going to be a bit longer, but this one's pretty short just for the sake of editing it together. She writes, I like to make art about watching TV and reading books. Ever since I was a little kid, so long ago, right? I liked having screen time, so making art about it makes me so happy. My art is also about the universal emotional experiences of curiosity and discovery. My art looks just like Warren's art from my preschool class. I love art. All right, so even though this is written from a 5-year-old's perspective, it does show some errors that are common that I see in college level artist statements. So let's talk about what some of those are and edit it together. Make this a bit bigger. All right. So the first thing that I see is a lot of the personal voice. I, me, my. I like to make art about watching TV. I, I. So of course you're going to need something like that in an artist statement. It's about you. But as we move through and edit this, we want to limit that to the essentials, just so that it doesn't feel like a diary entry. Because secondly, you want to remember who your audience is. This isn't a place where you're working through your ideas. You should already have kind of done that on your own time of what you think your art is about. This is to communicate to a reader from one of those audiences that I mentioned on the first slide, what your art is about. So you want to express it in clear terms that are going to relate to them. And if you have a lot of eyes, or you talk about when you were a little kid and these personal experiences and things that you enjoy, right? Making about it makes me so happy. I'll see a lot of times students will write that they enjoy doing something or it makes them happy. That's great, but in this case, you want the reader to know what's going to make them happy and enriched by looking at your artwork. So we want to limit that type of language. Um, some other things we want to do, and now we'll start getting messy in the nitty gritty of this, is that we want to start off in an interesting way. You don't want your viewer to just walk right past your artist statement and on to the next one. So usually starting off with my art or I or me can be an instant turn off or just a kind of boring way to start. When we're doing longer writing projects, I like to recommend things like a quote or a rich description or a little anecdote, which is a short story. But we don't really have space for that. So literally starting with any sentence that is more interesting than my art or me or my is fine. So it can be about the sentence structure that you're starting off with a more interesting sentence, and that's good enough. So here I think we're going to say, instead of I like to make art about watching TV and reading books, we'll say something like, From the Brothers Grimm to Disney, fairy tales have been a way for people to communicate their values, communicate their values. We'll leave it there. This is where we're going to delete this straight up. Especially now that you're in college, nobody cares about what happened when you were a little kid, unless it is a like very defining aspect of your art. Okay, so we're just going to delete ever since I was a little kid because you want to sound sophisticated and grown up. So focus on your more recent experiences and inspirations. And again, we're going to delete this whole sentence because we do care what makes the artist happy, but we really want to focus more on the viewer's experience. That's what this artist does in the next sentence, right? Focuses on the viewer. My art is also about the universal emotional experiences of curiosity and discovery. This is pretty good, right? It sounds really fancy, but we do tend to lean into kind of vague cliches oftentimes in these artist statements. Like, is curiosity and discovery universal? What does that mean? What's being discovered? What are we curious about here? So we want to add some more nuance into that. So another thing that we want to do is make it so we want to avoid cliches here. But we do want to let the viewer know, or reader know a little bit about what the art looks like. Because even though they can see it, we want to describe it a little bit so as if they can imagine it. So we have so far from the Brothers Grimm to Disney, fairy tales have been a way for people to communicate their values. In colorful compositions featuring fairies, mermaids, princesses, and witches. Yeah. I create my own fairy tales. We'll just leave it there. Crayon and colored pencil. Okay, so we'll share some medium here. We can really start to imagine what she's making, right? Crayon and colored pencil are fitting mediums for these childlike subjects. Or maybe we'll just say playful, innocent subjects. Then she goes on to say, my art looks just like Warren's art from my preschool class. I love that she's giving a reference here. She's talking about what inspires her, Brothers Grimm, Disney, Warren from her classroom. It's cool if you guys are forming your own circle of artists that are inspiring one another. But we may want to add an art history reference here, right? And another common mistake that I see with using art history in your artist statement is you put the cart before the horse, meaning that you create your art and then you set out to look for some other artists that look like it or have done that before. It's much more effective if you enter into a conversation, a visual conversation with artists who are already working and use them as inspiration, modify what they're doing, put a twist on it, and really actively use those sources rather than looking them up after the fact. But you could say something like this, that her art looks like Warren's art from a preschool class. Or we could say, this childlike approach is similar to artists like, we could say someone like Vasily Kandinsky. Not sure if I'm spelling that right. Like Kandinsky, who also was inspired by children's art and play, or Klee. I think I'm thinking of Paul Klee. All right, like Paul Klee. His first name's also easier to spell for me. All right, this childlike approach is similar to artists like Paul Klee, But unlike their appropriation of childhood, because they're adults being inspired by kids, my art is an authentic expression of a young person discovering the world through fantasy stories. Okay. And then again, we know you love art. Sometimes people can get overly passionate in these things. And while we love the passion to come through, sometimes it takes the wheel, right? So we also lastly want to conclude by giving the reader a take-home message. How does your art fit into like a much bigger conversation or a political issue or a social issue? Like, why is their art important to look at today in 2025? So I think fantasy stories, she says, my art is an authentic expression of a young person discovering the world through fantasy stories. Given the heaviness of today's adult world, this is a form of escape for viewers of all ages. All right, let's read that back, okay? We're going to go into full mode. All right, so we can see that this is really capturing her artwork. We can look at it and we can get a lot more out of it. And we'll read it back that from the Brothers Grimm to Disney, fairy tales have been a way for people to communicate their values. In colorful compositions featuring fairies, mermaids, princesses, and witches, I create my own fairy tales. Crayon and colored pencil are fitting mediums for these playful, innocent subjects. This childlike approach is similar to artists like Paul Klee, but unlike their appropriation of childhood, my art is an authentic expression of a young person discovering the world through fantasy stories. Given the heaviness of today's adult world, we might want to skip that word repetition. This is a form of escape for viewers of all ages. Awesome. Lily is ready for her retrospective at the Met. And after we recap this list, you will be too. Just a summary, our artist statement tips are to open in an interesting way, to consider your audience. And you, the artists, are not your audience, it's your reader. People should be able to visualize your work. You want to limit the personal voice. I, me, I. We did that really well in this sentence here. Crayon and colored pencil are fitting mediums. We don't say my medium, right? Kind of dodged that. We want to avoid cliches. Also, AI, artificial intelligence, you're going to really start seeing who's using AI in a negative way on their artist statements because AI is really good at spitting out artist speak that sounds really fancy, but isn't actually having much substance behind it. Finally, give the reader a clear take-home message or lesson from your art. I hope that you got some lessons from watching this video today. You can use this list to go over your own artist statement, or you can swap with a friend, or you can come see me during office hours because I love to talk about your writing and the artists that inspire you.